And welcome back, everyone, fellow football fanatics, whatever you call yourselves. It's College Football with Sam. Little bit of different plans today, change of plans, and also an explanation for why I haven't been live the past 2 days. Only scheduled Mondays and Wednesdays along with Sundays usually, but I'm trying to go live every Tuesday, really from here on out, because during the regular season, the schedule will move to Sundays, Mondays, and Wednesdays. That's what all of this will move to. And also probably maybe another live show. Like, I'm talking about 5 per week, because we're going to have a bunch of games to cover and also storylines and other things about different matchups. So we won't just be doing a video per matchup, or a segment per matchup. In some cases, it'll be multiple segments per matchup, because some matchups are bigger and better than others. But I felt pretty burned out recently, and I was a little bit concerned about that, and I noticed it in my content. I was making more mistakes, didn't feel as professional, and that made me concerned, and I was also a little bit overwhelmed with just stuff in general. Shouldn't have been overwhelmed, but was. So that's where I was the previous 2 days. It's really just doing a little bit of school, a little bit of other things, but taking a little bit of a retreat, I guess, from YouTube. I will be live tomorrow to compensate for that. How long of a show will it be? I don't know, but at least it'll be an hour. I'll also try to get to certain things tomorrow that I have missed this week that I've wanted to talk about. So, like recruiting. This has been a pretty big recruiting weekend, and I want to discuss that. Didn't have the time or really energy to get to that today, but we are doing USC expectations, Texas and Oregon, kind of me telling you what I think of their programs now and even what they could be moving forward. And then also redoing the Miami and Clemson predictions I did on Sunday. Just wasn't satisfied with the quality of those. Want to redo those. And then I also want to add an Alabama. Want to give my Alabama prediction. That will be the topics of today. It is a withdrawal Wednesday, I know, but I just didn't have the brain power or the energy to get to the viewer questions, and I don't want to be lazy with those and just be like, well, just kind of spitball and don't produce the same quality that I do for everything else. I want to make sure that everything's up to standard here, because the goal at College Football with Sam really is for us to be the next big thing on YouTube, the next big college football space, because I think that I can do it. I think that I can genuinely do that if I get certain things in order and continue to learn about college football and the wonderful sport that it is. I believe that we can do that. And a few reasons why are the fact that I have shown time and time again that on some things I am bold. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but on many things I do know what I'm talking about. I just do. Every year, the predictions on average get better, or they stay the same. There is more analysis. There is more details. There is more professionalism. More of a connection. You know what I'm talking about. So I think that we can do that. I think we can hit 6 figures for subscribers, and that in terms of revenue would be awesome. Don't know if that's very possible with the College Football YouTube account, but regardless, my goals for this channel are big. So therefore, I want things to be up to standard. Got to be realistic, though, and that's a tough thing to balance, but life is a balancing act. So before we get started, I just want to encourage any of you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below, and make sure to join my Discord server via the link in the description. There are several things that this channel is interested in doing. And by that, I mean, of course, myself, because I run this, but I also have a handful of people who are involved, too, in a variety of different ways. If you want to become someone who is involved, and whether it's you want to help out the channel, or maybe give, like, feedback, or even potentially, depending on if you're a fan of a large university and you're a fan who interacts with other fans, feel free to email me at collegefootballwithsam@gmail.com, because all hands on deck is, I think, the best strategy for this channel moving forward. If you think you can help in any way, even if it's just feedback, or if you think you can maybe help with, I don't know, anything else, just shoot me an email there and we can have a discussion. But that's the last thing before we get into the conversations at hand for today. Again, the Alabama, Miami, and Clemson record predictions, and USC, Texas, and Oregon are some other teams that I want to talk about. We're live usually Sundays, Mondays, and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I will update that this weekend to cement some changes that I'm going to be making entering the regular season. And I am going to be live tonight until probably 8:30, maybe a little bit later, but I'm shooting for 8:30 to get off. If you do want to tell me anything during this time from now until 8:30 and have me reply to it live, you can send me a super chat and I will just do that. I'll answer your question. Otherwise, we'll just keep right in and lean into the segments. And I want to talk about Alabama first, and a team that went from being the pinnacle of the sport, went from being the mountaintop of the sport, to missing the college football playoffs after it was expanded to 12 teams. Just think about that for a minute. Alabama went from being the pinnacle of the sport, from being the number one program with the greatest head coach of all time, from being the mountaintop, to missing the playoffs after it was expanded. It was a very disappointing year for Alabama faithful and for Alabama fans. It was. And yet, from my perspective, with hindsight, and I think many other analysts and even some Alabama fans feel this way, with where the program was trending under Saban in his final 3 years, or maybe if you just want to say the final 1 year, because the Bryce Young teams were very good. They were better than the 2023 Alabama team in terms of potential. This may have been expected with some hindsight, with conference expansion, with Alabama facing a even tougher regular season schedule than they were used to in the SEC West, having to play Georgia, which doesn't always happen, didn't always happen under the old format. And then, of course, you have to factor in they had to play Oklahoma on the road. They had a non-conference matchup against Wisconsin on the road, won that game, and Wisconsin imploded later in the year, but they were a competent team. So while Alabama's talent was declining and was shrinking in terms of both roster size with the new restrictions and with the portal constantly pillaging top players, which Alabama has always had, and then conference expansion, which hurts any team at the top, usually, if you're bringing in really good programs like Texas and Oklahoma. Well, in hindsight, maybe it's not all that surprising that Alabama went 9-3, but I digress. This is a 2025 Alabama record prediction, and I want to talk about 2025. It's just useful sometimes to look back on 2024 and on the prior year, even with the portal, even with staff changes, and especially I think this is the case because the SEC conference schedules are the exact same as last year in terms of the teams you're playing. They are just different in the locations. So last year's home games are now road games, and last year's road games are now home games. But this is only DeBoer's second year, guys. This is something that we have to remember. So Saban, number one, the greatest coach of all time, and I still think he was an excellent game planner and game manager in his final years. The fact that that team went 12-2 and nearly beat a Michigan team that was the first team since 2001 Miami to not trail at halftime, and that I think was better than the 2022 Georgia national championship team that Alabama didn't play, and was better than the 2024 Ohio State team that Alabama didn't play. That's a testament, I think, to the fact that Nick Saban was an excellent game manager and was still an excellent coach at the end. But the roster management, the hiring and firing of certain position coaches, and just things that were under him that weren't directly tied to him but indirectly tied to him, I think were beginning to wither. And it's part of my belief that that's why he left when he did. I think that he, from his perspective, saw things going a way that he didn't like. A, because he just didn't like them objectively, such as paying players and them wanting to know, first and foremost, how much money they were earning, when his whole message was being transformational and relational. And then B, I think it's also due to the fact that he has a standard. And from his perspective, he couldn't meet that standard in this new era. So he left. Again, want to move on to 2025, but I think especially with Alabama, you have to set the stage with 2023 and 2024 to understand the current roster predicament, because they're top 3 in roster talent, and I am very bullish on their wide receiver core. I think it's underrated. I love their defensive line. I love their defense. I think Alabama's defense is going to be wicked this year. It's going to be one of the best defenses in America. But what I will say is, for being a top 5 talent roster and probably still number 1, if not that number 2, only behind Georgia, last year and in 2023, they didn't play like it. They really, really didn't. They played more like a top 10 caliber roster, and sometimes worse than that, other times better than that. And that is where I just want to set the stage. Is Alabama really a top 3 roster when you factor in development, when you factor in coaching, or maybe when you factor in that sometimes recruiting rankings are wrong? They're mostly correct, especially now. But sometimes they overrate a player or they underrate a player. There's diamonds in the rough and there are busts. That's a question that I want to leave up for interpretation. Talking about the schedule, though, this is a schedule where, when I see things, a top 10 roster, a top 5 roster, or especially one where the recruiting rankings are totally accurate and development is okay, a top 2 roster like Alabama's, you should expect to win 11 or 10 games with this roster. Over-under win totals 9.5. They play 10 Power 4 teams, one Group of 5 team in ULM, and one FCS team in Eastern Illinois. Their schedule is as follows, and it's beautifully color schemed, I think. This is one of my more favorite schedules in terms of just the color scheme that I've used for it. I love it. So this actually makes me pretty happy looking at it. And it's also a good schedule because you get a road game at Florida State week 1, week 2 ULM, but hey, everyone has to play 1 or 2 or 3 of those teams. Week 3 they host Wisconsin. Week 4 they get a bye before traveling to Georgia week 5. They host Vanderbilt week 6, play at Missouri week 7. Tennessee's at home week 8, third Saturday in October, as always. At South Carolina week 9, they get a bye week 10. Host LSU week 11. Host Oklahoma week 12. Host Eastern Illinois week 13. Travel to Auburn week 14 for the Iron Bowl. I think this Iron Bowl is going to be one of the better Iron Bowls of recent memory, especially that's always the case when it's in Jordan-Hare. Alabama's the better program, almost always fields the better team than Auburn, so when it's at Alabama, it can sometimes get out of hand. When it's on the road at Auburn, that's really where the fun and the competition and the closeness of that matchup really comes out. Again, though, you should go 11-1 or 12-0 with this schedule. I'm going to say 11-1 and 10-2 being more likely than 12-0. But 12-0 is possible if the roster talent plays to its name, the coaching job improves from last season, and Ty Simpson turns out to be a significantly better quarterback for Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb's system than Jalen Milroe was. I lean negative at quarterback personally. I don't like the fact that Simpson couldn't overthrow Milroe for the starting job for the previous 2 years, even though Saban wanted him to. Y'all remember the USF game in 2023? Saban wanted someone else besides Milroe to start, and the team kind of, I don't know, came out with an uninspired effort, and Buckner and Simpson just couldn't do anything. That game I don't really take into account for the present, because I think Simpson that year was a redshirt freshman or a true freshman. Last year, though, he couldn't overthrow Milroe at all, and Milroe had some awful, awful performances. So, also including that Keelan Russell and also Austin Mack have been involved in this competition with Simpson. DeBoer said at SEC Media Days he'd start Simpson right now if he had to, but there's still a quarterback competition going on. Some other positions that I like. Quarterback, I like nationally, but for Alabama standards in this schedule, I do not. That's why I lean negative. And I think the assistant staff is lacking a bit here and there. Love the coordinators, love Kalen DeBoer, but some of these positional assistants, I think, wouldn't be employed at Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Penn State. I think you get what I'm saying here. And maybe I'm incorrect, but I think Alabama could use some better assistant coaches. Not talking about a guy like Jamarcus Shepard, who would be the best wide receiver coach in America if not for Brian Hartline, just saying some other positions. I like Jam Miller at running back, Parker Brailsford at center, Jaden Roberts at guard, and then Caden Proctor at tackle. Alabama could have a really good O-line. It was also a unit that had some inconsistencies last year, and Booker was their best player. So I think there's a lot of variability there. Wide receiver, I love with Ryan Williams, Isaiah Horton, Jeremy Bernard, Josh Huevis at tight end. They have Tim Keenan III at D tackle, along with James Smith. That's a wonderful duo. And then LT Overton, Qua Russo at edge, Deontay Lawson, Justin Jefferson at linebacker. They're both seniors. Bray Hubbard, Keon Sabb at safety, and then Zabian Brown, Damani Jackson, Deshaun Jones at corner. All these players are on my all-SEC teams, which are larger than most all-conference teams, but just wanted to shout them out there because those are players who I think are going to be some of the best in the land and in the SEC this season. Alabama brings back 64% of its production from last year, and they're second in preseason S&P Plus, given a 27.9 rating. In FPI, they're only behind Georgia and Texas. My prediction for Alabama is 9-3, 5-3. Tied for fourth in the SEC, much like last season, and going to a bowl game. The reason for this is I have just questions about the overall. Besides the QB position, it's just this eerie feeling. The style of coaching, the team chemistry, the fact that I think in my mind, with last season in mind and then 2023 in mind, that Saban may have left before the lack of proper roster evaluation or development that I think was evident in Alabama in his final few years really punched the program in the gut. And if anyone can fix it, it's Kalen DeBoer, because DeBoer is awesome, and I still think Alabama is one of the best programs in America. I think DeBoer is the third best coach in America. Could even be better than that. He could be the best coach in America right now. Just look at what he did at Washington, Fresno State, Indiana. He carried Tom Allen's program. Same with now his defensive coordinator, Kane Womack. You see the picture. But there are enough games, whether it's against Georgia, Missouri, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Auburn, LSU, if they play to a much higher level than I think they will, where they can lose some close games. And they finally played Georgia in Sanford, and a lot went wrong for Georgia last year, more so than what went wrong for Alabama. Alabama's roster played closer to its ceiling than Georgia's did. Helps when, Georgia has the toughest schedule maybe in college football history to play to a higher ceiling with your roster than they did. And now you have to play them on the road. Auburn's going to be better. Oklahoma will be better. LSU should be better. South Carolina probably won't be a better team overall, but their quarterback play should be better, and it's on the road. Tennessee, I don't think they're going anywhere. I think they'll be a much worse team, but still top 25 caliber. And Missouri's going to have that game circled, and they get it off of a bye. And Vanderbilt was more physical than Alabama last year. I think they'll beat Vanderbilt. I'll guarantee that as a win today. But this schedule's not easy. It isn't. And I don't know if this team is as deep as their talent resume may imply. So that's the biggest reason why I have them losing 3 games. I mean, if you gave them an easier schedule, like some of the Big Ten teams have, or any Big 12 team, or almost any ACC team minus Georgia Tech has, and even they don't have the same number of top 25, top 20 power-rated teams, yeah, I'd say Alabama makes the playoffs. But they play a tough schedule. And that combined with some questions I have at quarterback, with some questions I have about their, can't even believe I'm saying this. I feel like a heretic with how many people have praised their offensive line. But I have some questions about it. It's been this hyper-talented unit that has elite NFL players in terms of size and physicality for a while, and yet it's never been this uber-dominant unit. It just hasn't. And that's been the same case with the defensive line outside of edge, where they've still done well at edge. But in terms of, your down defensive linemen, a little bit of a different story there. I think Alabama will be a better quality team this year than they were last year. Last year, towards the end, that was an awful unit by Alabama standards. The way the Michigan game panned out, how they were incapable of really pulling away from Auburn and blowing them out when they should have. The fact that they looked the way they did against Oklahoma, that against LSU, very dominant performance, but that was because they had a severe matchup advantage with Milroe versus an LSU defense that was putrid at stopping the run. They will be a better team this year. I think that more likely than not, they actually do go 10-2 and reach the playoffs. From a power ratings simulating the season for 1,000 times sense. We're doing these predictions on a Scoville scale, by the way. So that's my mild prediction, one that I think is easy, almost a lock to happen. Medium prediction, we're going to crank up the heat until we get to a Hellfire prediction, which is my hottest for the team overall. Alabama's defense is a fiery unit that finishes inside of the top 10 or higher. Maybe top 5. I love Alabama's defense this year more than I do their offense. Really mean that. Yes, they return a lot at wide receiver. They bring in a good portal player. But they also lose some at tight end. They lose their best offensive lineman. Their running back depth is thinner. And Simpson is not the runner that Milroe is. So if you have a mismatch in terms of rushing offense, it's going to be much harder to exploit that this year than last year. And I don't know how much of a better passer Simpson is than Milroe, given how he couldn't beat him out. I mean, DeBoer prefers passers more than runners. We've seen this with Penix, who, even before his ACL injury, was definitely a superior quality passer than he was a scrambler or a designed runner. That's what he wants to do. So the fact that a quarterback who was built for DeBoer's system couldn't beat out Milroe, who Bill O'Brien, someone else who likes more pro-style quarterbacks, said should be a tight end, I think might be telling here. Nonetheless, that my concerns combined with what I like on the roster, especially on defense, gives me my hot prediction, which is that all of the Tide's losses come by 8 points or fewer. So a score or fewer. I think that you look at, Georgia, Missouri, South Carolina, LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, they're going to lose 3 of those games, and they're all going to be close. It's not going to be like last year where Oklahoma, at the end of the day, won by multiple scores. It's going to be more like the Tennessee and Vanderbilt games, but across all 3 losses instead of just 2 of the 3. My scorching prediction is that the Crimson Tide will yet again miss the college football playoff, but that I don't think is the boldest prediction. I think the boldest prediction is that their offense, from my perspective, is nearly, not quite as inconsistent, but nearly as inconsistent due to the quarterback play and due to the offensive line. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. However, I am not a believer in Chris Kaplovich. I am a believer in Ryan Grubb, but remember, Scott Huff, the offensive line coach for Washington, when DeBoer was there, Washington's O-lines were dominant. They were, really, really, really good. They were a big part of the reason why, at Washington, DeBoer only lost 3 games and won 25 of them. An average 12.5 wins per year in his 2 years there. It's a big part of the reason why. So that combined with, I don't think Ty Simpson is Michael Penix Jr. I don't think this wide receiver core is as good as that Washington team. And I know that they have a better defensive staff probably than that Washington team did. But you also play a better opponent, a significantly better opponent on average, week to week. And I also think that relative to their talent, DeBoer at Washington and his staff did a better job developing their players than I've so far seen DeBoer and Alabama staff develop theirs. Now, maybe that's too harsh because he's only been there for 1 year, and I really like DeBoer. But again, I'm thinking 9 or 10 wins for this team is the most likely outcome. I'm going with 9-3, 5-3 for now in SEC play. Tied for 4th. They'll probably go to the Citrus Bowl and represent the SEC as the best team that missed the playoffs. All right, let's immediately jump right in to the Clemson Tigers. I'm very fascinated at the prospect of Clemson finally being a team that can compete for a national title like they were in the 2010s. Clemson went 10-4 last year, 7-1 in ACC play. They were second there. It took an upset loss by Miami against Syracuse that allowed Clemson in the ACC championship game. They took advantage of the opportunity, beat SMU, who was 8-0 in ACC play. And then Clemson, after winning that game, played in Austin against Texas, lost that game, but you saw signs of hope. Clemson's offense hung 28 points on their own, 28 of them, against Texas. Or maybe not 28, I think it was 24. Yes, 24. They hung 24 on Texas's defense. And that is impressive on its own when you think about the fact that Ohio State only put up 21 offensive points, and they finished with the number 1 offense per FPI's efficiency metrics. Arizona State, it took Texas choking for Arizona State's offense to put up the amount of points they did. And then you get into some of the film and the fact that Clemson was injured in that game and they were playing in Austin, and Garrett Riley entering year 3 and who Klubnik is and those receivers are. And I thought to myself, well, that offense did a good job against Texas's defense in hindsight. They did a better job than the Ohio State offense, better job than the Arizona State offense, and both of those offenses, especially the Ohio State one, had several X-factor players. And unlike those two teams, where Arizona State loses their biggest player, Scatabo, and while Ohio State returns Jeremiah Smith, they lose Judkins, Henderson, Howard, their best offensive lineman by a mile, and Donovan Jackson, and also Emeka Egbuka, although I think they'll replace him pretty easily because Ohio State's just so loaded at wide receiver. Clemson brings back everyone except for Phil Maffa. They didn't have Phil Maffa in that playoff game, and they didn't have him for part of the ACC championship game. And with the O-line they bring back and with Garrett Riley's system, I think they could plug in almost anyone at running back and have success there. I am positive with everything about Clemson except for the run game. That I'm kind of neutral on, thinking they'll easily figure it out because the talent and scheme they have, but it's probably not something that's going to be spectacular. I only lean negative a little bit at guard, and this account on Twitter called Clemson Addict brings up this good point about how in big games this team has really struggled recently. And that's a concern for me. They should have beaten South Carolina. They should have beaten the brakes off of South Carolina, talent-wise, and the fact they had home field advantage. And they didn't. They should have crushed SMU, similar logic, via talent, and they didn't. And they should have played more competitively with Georgia, factoring in the high school talent they recruit, and they didn't. They shouldn't have lost to Louisville that way. They should have played Texas maybe a little bit tighter in that first half. You get the gist. I mean, they shouldn't have lost to, nearly lost to Pittsburgh or look that way against Virginia Tech, for example. The fact that Miami was power rated ahead of them was sort of an embarrassment, if I'm being honest, with the talent Clemson has. But I am positive about this team in a variety of ways. But the performance in big games does make me worry a bit. The good news for the Tigers is that their big games are mostly at home, and the ones that are on the road are against teams where Clemson has a massive experience and talent edge. Think about week 1 against LSU. Clemson returns more than LSU. They're not as portal reliant. They're more talented, and Kelly has never won an opener as the LSU head coach. It's week 1. Week 2, they play Troy. Week 3, they play at Georgia Tech. They have more experience than Georgia Tech, more talent, and while Georgia Tech may be able to run the ball or successfully stop the run against Clemson, Clemson will have an air superiority advantage. They play Syracuse week 4, on the bye week 5, or after the bye on week 5. They play 2 back-to-back road games at North Carolina and at Boston College. Much more talented than them. They host SMU in week 8. Week 9, they get a bye. Week 10, they host Duke. Week 11, they host Florida State. Week 12, they play at Louisville. Week 13, they host Furman. And week 14, they travel to South Carolina. It's a schedule that per FPI is ranked 40th nationally. I talked about Alabama's schedule in the last segment and how that's one of the toughest schedules in America. And that's why I have Alabama losing 2 or 3 games, more likely than not. And maybe they can go 11-1, but there's also a path where an Alabama team that's top 10 could go 8-4 with that schedule. If they lose a bunch of one-score games or maybe one critical player gets injured. With Clemson, you don't have that type of schedule. And that combined with the experience, and with Riley being in year 3, and with Allen being an upgrade over Wes Goodwin, tells me that this team can go 12-0, and that's realistic. And their realistic floor is probably going 10-2. You don't play Georgia. You don't. So there's no likely blowout loss. That's one of the games I saw coming from a mile away last year is Kirby Smart has been an infinitely better coach than Sweeney has since 2021, if not since 2020 itself, the COVID year, the beginning of this decade. His staff is way better right now. His talent is far better. He's done a better job of using the portal. He plays in the tougher conferences, so he's usually more battle-tested. That was a clear blowout from a mile away last year. There's no game like that on this schedule. So there's no auto loss. I mean, you think that LSU should be favored over Clemson? I don't think so. Should South Carolina, with all they lost? No, of course not. If Clemson could just stop the run last year on defense, if they had Tom Allen as last year's defensive coordinator, they'd probably win that game. Not saying it's a guaranteed win this year because, playing in Williams-Brice Stadium is quite the challenge, although Dabo Swinney hasn't lost in that stadium in quite a bit. But regardless, the schedule is very manageable, especially with the players that Clemson has. And let's name some of them. I've mentioned before that I think Clemson is about to be surpassed by Miami in terms of roster talent. And I think that will be the case definitely after this season when Clemson loses a bunch and Miami likely brings back more on top of bringing in better recruiting classes for really the previous 3 years and using the portal more. But Clemson, from my perspective, looking at my ACC teams, all ACC teams, has 9 players on my first team. Now, my first teams are bigger than most. Same with my second team, third team, fourth team. I also have a fifth and sixth team. So I have more teams and more spots per team than most do, but still only good players are represented here, especially with super conferences. I have Avion Terrell at corner on my first team all ACC. I have the same with Will Helt and TJ Parker at edge, with Peter Woods at defensive tackle. I have the top 3 wide receivers in the ACC belonging to Clemson: TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco Jr., and Antonio Williams. I would not be shocked if they all finished the year with 1,000 receiving yards. That would not shock me. Not one bit. I have Blake Miller at tackle on my first team all ACC, and it's the same with Cade Klubnik at quarterback. Some other players are Gideon Davidson at running back. I think he's going to have a good year as a true freshman. Should start. Ryan Linthicum at center. Harris Sewell at guard. Tristan Lay at tackle. Also have Olsen Pat Henry at tight end. Think he'll replace Bringingstool quite well. DeMonte Capehart at D tackle. Same with Stephalon Green. Also Jaheim Lawson at edge. Sammy Brown and Wade Woodaz on my second team at linebacker. Ricardo Jones and Khalil Barnes. And in addition to Avion Terrell at corner, I have Jaden Lucas and Ashton Hampton representing the All-ACC teams. And kicker Nolan Hauser outside of the honorable mention team. So in the top 4 teams. Pretty impressive, I would say. I don't quite think that at certain positions Miami has the top depth in the ACC anymore, but they have the best starting roster. They do. And they have depth in positions that I think matter more than the positions where Miami has depth. For example, I think Miami, the chief challenger for Clemson this year in the ACC, has far better depth at running back, has far better depth at tight end, and may have better depth at some positions on defense. Think about Reuben Bain Jr. at D end, and then all the older players Miami is there too. Maybe they have more playable depth. I don't know. They can contend, I think, at linebacker and corner there against Clemson too. And I think their O-line might be deeper. But a lot of those are maybes outside of running back and tight end. And I think Clemson right now is deeper at QB, deeper at wide receiver. I think they right now are more proven at center. They are deeper at D tackle by a mile. Could be deeper at edge, linebacker, and corner. And I think they're deeper at safety. So this is the premier team and program in the ACC right now as it stands. And that is why, with 80% of their production coming back, which is first nationally, and given a preseason SP Plus rating of a 23.3, it's why I'm picking Clemson to, win the vast majority of their games. That's why I'm picking that to happen. And before we get there, I want to talk about some predictions that I have for this season. My mild prediction, we're going to be going on a Scoville scale here. So mild, medium, hot, scorched, and hellfire levels of heat for these predictions. My mild pick is that the Tigers make the college football playoff for the second year in a row. I think this is pretty easy. Medium one is that Clemson goes undefeated in its out-of-conference schedule. That means LSU, Troy, Furman, and South Carolina. I'm sorry, but I think Clemson's beating you, and I think all of those games except for South Carolina, Clemson will win by double digits. I mean, those games, I think, will all be dominant victories. Obviously, Furman and Troy. LSU's a bit bolder given the current spread. I really do not like LSU there at all. My hot prediction is that Cade Klubnik solidifies himself as the number one quarterback in the nation, which means trip to New York, I'd say somewhat likely. What about Heisman? I have not made my Heisman pick yet, but I think Jeremiah Smith, depending on how Miami's offense does, maybe Carson Beck, Arch Manning. You also got to think about Drew Aller or one of the Penn State running backs or one of the Notre Dame running backs, for example, or maybe Julian Sayin, quarterback for Ohio State. There's a lot of different candidates, but I think Klubnik is up there. Also got to consider DJ Lagway and Lenora Sellers if they can carry their teams to a lot of wins with those schedules. But I think Klubnik's going to be the number one QB this year, and then Aller, Sellers, and Lagway will contend with him there. And just on the outside looking in, I think Manning and Mendoza could as well. My scorching prediction, by the end of the season, Clemson will field the top 10 offense and top 10 defense. This is bold because when you factored in the big games and weighed them more, as you should, and power ratings don't always do that, Clemson did not have a top 10 offense. It was close, probably top 15, top 20, had games where it looked like a top 10 offense. But in the big games, they scored 3 points against Georgia. They scored 14 points against South Carolina. They kicked a bunch of field goals and got a ton of them blocked by Louisville. And against Texas, it was a good game, but they only scored 24 points. They did. And the Ohio State and Arizona State offenses that also scored against the Texas defense in the playoffs, none of those were close to generational offenses either. Just look at the efficiency metrics. 2024 was a down year, and the fact that Clemson couldn't take advantage of that with their talent, I think is a little bit concerning. And then the defense was not even close to top 10. At the end of the year, it wasn't even top 25. Yeah, they had top 25 talent, but they couldn't stop the run to save their life. I mean, Texas, I've made this joke with one of my Texas buddies before. What Texas would do is they just get up to the line at different points, and Ewers would look, and he would just change the play. It's like run to the left or run to the right. It's outside zone or an outside run, and then boom, you have a 30-yard gain or a touchdown. They couldn't stop the run to save their life, and it's not like they faced a bunch of competent passing offenses either. They just weren't a great unit. So I think predicting both the offense and defense to take massive steps forward, especially in big games, because I do think Clemson is going to win some big games this year, it's a scorching prediction. It's hot, whether you like it or not. My boldest prediction, though, is that Clemson goes undefeated before the college football playoffs and they get a first-round bye. I don't think LSU is stopping them. I don't think Georgia Tech will. If there is a team who's most likely, I think, to stop Clemson it's going to be Georgia Tech or Louisville. Could be SMU. I say that because I like all of their line of scrimmage more than LSU's. I do. I like LSU's outside talent and depth more than those teams, but I think the way to beat Clemson is to physically manhandle them up front. South Carolina has a much better shot of doing that than LSU with Dylan Stewart, with the fact that, their offensive line, while it hasn't been great under Beamer, is leveling up in talent, and I have faith in their D-line at this point, and their defensive coordinator, Clayton White. I think he's a really good DC. But I don't think anyone's going to stop Clemson in the regular season. Who will stop Clemson is a team who matches up well with them in the college football playoffs if they have to play a team like that. I'm picking this team, yes, in Clemson to go 13-0, to win the ACC, beating out Miami, who will be the runner-ups, and receive a first-round bye. This is going to be a impressive, wickedly good team. Now, I think they'll have some close wins. I don't think this will be a Clemson team that is better than any of the teams spanning 2015 to 2020. I don't think it'll be better than any of those teams, but that's really the case with everyone. No one outside of the programs who are down or who are top 5 spenders. So Texas has better depth than they did in the 2010s because they were down and their pockets are bigger than everyone else. It's the same with Oregon. Oregon wasn't down, but they were down at times, but not for the whole duration. But they have bigger pockets than everyone else. And they have an alpha recruiter, not a guy who's trying to punch above his weight class in the West Coast. But outside of really those programs, maybe a Texas Tech, or maybe if, Michigan gets Larry Ellison involved, they could maintain the depth that they did or that they used to. It's hard for almost any school in America to have the same depth they did just a few years ago. And I think Clemson's in that category. I do. But so, again, is everyone else. So, relative to past teams, this team won't be the Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence teams. But then again, Ohio State won't have its 2019 team, or maybe even its 2020 team again. Georgia will not have the teams of its early 2020s or some teams of its 2010s that had crazy depth. Alabama won't field the 2010 style teams again, or the 2010 style teams. So relative to every given season where you're weighing things by what happened in the season and not comparing seasons, this Clemson team, I think, can easily achieve what those teams in the 2010s did. Easily, given the state of college football. And their easy schedule may not prepare them to beat high-quality teams. It will save them from injuries. So that's kind of the weighing your costs is, do you prefer to be more battle-tested? Or do you prefer to not get banged up? I think that's the new reality of college football in a lot of ways. And Clemson has enough good teams to where I think they can get battle-tested. They're also very experienced, so they could probably play at an absolute cupcake schedule and still be prepared for the best teams because a lot of those players have played Georgia. Some of them, thinking 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. There are some redshirt seniors on that team who've played Georgia twice, both in 2024 and 2021. They played Tennessee in 2022 in that Peach Bowl. They've played Notre Dame twice. Some of those players have. Cade Klubnik has, for example. So I think this team is going to be healthy, going to be battle-tested. Will they be the best team in America? They could be. I'm not picking it, but I see the logic behind it, for sure. Now we'll move on to Miami. And I'm actually having fun here. So thank you guys for being on and helping me to have fun. I'm kind of ecstatic right now. Very much. Let me look at any of the comments. There is no super chat, sadly. Okay, but someone said check my inbox, so I'm gonna pull up that right now just so I don't forget. But I am gonna pull that up right now. Said check my inbox. Okay, I do not see anything right now. I don't see, maybe it's in my spam. Nope, no spam. Can you, let me see, Mac the Mustard Man. I'll just put the email right here. If any of you think you can help out with the channel in any way, whether it's like graphic design for Twitter or Instagram, or you just want to give me some feedback, there's my email. Now let's resume the episode because we have to, and because it's fun. So I want to talk about Miami and discuss why I think the Hurricanes are probably going to be better than a lot of people expect. Now, of course, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by Miami's going to be better than people expect? Do I mean they're going to go 10-2 again? Do I mean they're going to make the college football playoffs? Do I mean they're going to be a true national championship contender? Well, it depends on how you view last season. It really depends on how you view last season. Excuse me there, just had to put myself on mute for a second. I happen to think that Miami did not waste their 2024 season. I think that it was disappointing. I believe that they needed to make the playoffs with the roster moves they had, with the staff that they acquired, with the QB that they acquired in Cam Ward. They may have passed up on a generational college QB, maybe even generational NFL QB. I love his work ethic, and I think that he is someone who will probably succeed in the NFL. At least hopefully. It's going to be hard to win with the Titans. But they didn't waste last season. Two things can be true, that 2024 was disappointing on one hand for Miami, but also showed that under Mario Cristobal, their overall program trajectory is upward. They're going to be successful. And I will say right now that after this season, they will be probably the number one program in the ACC, unless they utterly implode. Because Clemson's recruiting has not looked so hot, and their development hasn't looked so hot. Miami has been hotter at development and recruiting in recent memory than Clemson has. They have. Last season was the perfect example of this. Clemson still had infinitely more talent than Miami did because they recruited at an elite level for several classes before Cristobal even got there, and they held on to those players. Now, they've done a good job at developing, I think, but they haven't won big games. Neither has Mario with Miami. However, last season, guess who was power rated higher? Well, Miami was. They're power rated higher than Clemson. Guess who successfully killed their SEC opponent, or opponents plural? Well, Miami did. Clemson didn't. They lost to South Carolina. Now, to be fair, it was at the end of the year. South Carolina figured some things out. They got destroyed by Georgia at the beginning of the year. Florida, Miami met at the beginning of the year before they could figure some things out. But still, that Florida team was projected to do fairly well by some, and people acknowledged they had a lot of talent. It came as a surprise when Miami went in there and just completely depanted Billy Napier on live TV. Like, that surprised a lot of people. It even surprised me a tad bit at just how dominant Miami looked in that game. They'll get a chance to do that again to Florida, though this time at home, although with how much Florida brings back, Florida also has a chance to win that game. Miami's schedule is an intriguing schedule, and it's a fun schedule. They play Notre Dame, for example, on a Sunday night in week 1. Then they play Bethune-Cookman week 2, USF week 3. They get Florida at home week 4 to close out their September schedule because they have a bye in week 5. And sandwiched in between their week 5 bye and week 7 bye, they play Florida State on the road. I mean, that's fun. You play 2 other Florida schools for a chance at the Florida Cup, and then Notre Dame in a Catholics versus Convicts rerun. And then after the week 7 bye, they get Louisville. Louisville should be a good team. Stanford at home week 9. That's probably a snooze fest. But then a road trip to SMU week 10. Syracuse at home week 11. NC State at home week 12. At Virginia Tech and at Pittsburgh week 13 and 14 to close out the year. And the over-under win total's 9.5. I think it's juiced to the under. I think. But I could be wrong. And I can see why. I mean, look, their schedule's no different from Clemson's in overall toughness. It's not an SEC schedule. It's not your average Big Ten schedule either. But there's some heft to it. I'd be lying to you if I said there wasn't. I mean, they play Notre Dame. And Phil Steele, for whatever reason, I happen to disagree with him, but I can see it, has Notre Dame ranked second. Second. That's where he has Notre Dame. And he also has Florida, I think, top 10. and has Florida State rebounding a little bit. He has also Miami ranked top 20, maybe top 15. I forget where he has them, but definitely a top 25 team. Their playoff odds are in the plus, but at plus 198, so not too outside that picture. And I think this is a playoff caliber team when I look at this roster. It's a roster that is balanced. It is a roster that is going to benefit from the fruits of a new coaching staff on defense. I love on defense Ruben Bain Jr., Akeem Mesidor, Armando Blount, and Malik Bryant at defensive edge. Justin Scott, Ahmad Moten, and David Blay. Well, I think Miami would benefit from having a deeper defensive tackle room if they can stay healthy there and at least one player steps up, and I'm kind of expecting Justin Scott to, then I think they'll be good there. Linebacker, Wesley Besainth, Raul Aguirre Jr., and Mohamed Touré. I loved the addition of Mohamed Touré, by the way. Loved that addition from Rutgers. These are all players on my all-ACC teams, and they're all good players. I didn't make my all-conference teams larger to include mediocre players. I made them to include more good players. I have Zachariah Poyser and Jacoby Thomas at safety, and then Xavier Lucas, OJ Frederic, and Charles Brantley at corner. Every single one of Miami's starting defensive players I have in my all-ACC team, and I have several depth players there too. If Burt Auburn pans out, Miami could reload at kicker. Dylan Joyce should be a good punter. Keelan Marion, they got out of the portal from BYU. I have him on my all-ACC team at wide receiver, but also as the best overall return specialist. That's going to be huge for Miami, especially since they lost, Xavier Restrepo and Jacoby George. Lost a lot at wide receiver. And then Isaiah Horton in the portal to Alabama. I think Trader's going to be good there. Same with Tony Johnson, CJ Daniels, and Keelan Marion, but Trader will be the wide receiver one. Those other players are contributors. They are role players, but they are not elite players like, let's say, you have all across the board for Clemson at wide receiver, or that Notre Dame or Georgia Tech have at their wide receiver one. I like Elijah Lofton and Alex Bauman at tight end. And then I think Molly Go is the best overall tackle in college football. Markel Bell's good too there. Matthew McCoy and Inez Cooper and James Brockermeyer round out the interior that's on my All-ACC team. Mark Fletcher Jr., Jordan Lyle, and Charmar Brown are at running back there. And then I think Carson Beck is going to be a top 15, top 10 quarterback this year. I think he's going to maybe not be quite as effective numerically, statistically, that he was in 2023, but I think he'll be playing closer to that level on the field and on the film than he was in 2024. I think that Shannon Dawson is a better offensive coordinator than Mike Bobo, and he'll probably have a better O-line this year at Miami than he did with Georgia last year, and he'll definitely have better receivers by a mile than what Georgia had last year. I mean, that Georgia receiver room was, oh boy, it's bad. If Georgia, I picked Georgia last year to win it all. If they had Carnell Tate as wide receiver one, they may have just won it all. But that's hypotheticals. It's like if Michigan brought J.J. McCarthy back, they may have won 10 games and played in Indy. If Ohio State didn't recruit Jeremiah Smith and Miami did, they may have gone 9-3 last year. And we look at Ryan Day differently. Or if Ohio State, for example, doesn't lose Josh Simmons in an injury, maybe they go 15-1 or 16-0, and that they're viewed in an even more positive way. Or Clemson, they don't lose Brent Venables, and Venables just decides he wants to be a career defensive coordinator. They probably don't have some of the low moments they did over the past 3 seasons. So there's a lot of hypotheticals that we can play all day long. And a hypothetical for Miami last year is, what if they had a good defense? And I think that while Beck won't be as good as Ward and the receiver core will be worse, I think you will see some of that play out, where this team, they're 60th in returning production, but they're 12th in preseason S&P Plus at an 18.8. They're top 10 in ESPN's FPI. So the power ratings recognize the talent they're acquiring and the fact that every year they're getting better. And under Cristobal, it's kind of been exponential. 5-7, then 7-5, and then 10-2, and at one point being ranked in the top 10 for much of the year in power ratings. Analytics recognize that stuff. And I do too. I have them reaching the ACC championship game. And regardless of what they do in the ACC championship game, I think they'll be a lock to make it. I have this team going 11-1 in the regular season, just losing to Clemson because I think Clemson has more experience, and I think that Dabo Swinney is better in big games than Mario Cristobal is. But this team is good. If you think this team is going to pull a Florida State, which Danny Cannell, for example, from the Cover 3 podcast, kind of thinks Miami will implode, or at least is willing to bet on the fact it's likely, I would like to ask you why. Why do you think that way? What evidence do you have to back that up? We can always make some bold predictions that are more gut feelings, and I'm willing to, buy that. But why wouldn't this team stay pretty level? Yes, they're going to get worse on offense, but defensively, Corey Heatherman is far better than Lance Guidry, and they're returning a lot of talent on defense, and then they added a lot through the portal, especially at secondary. And if you're going to have an entire position be made up of portal players, and if you're Miami, well, that's your secondary. That's your secondary, because it was so bad last year that if just half of the incoming portal players there pan out, you will be better. And then bringing back Ruben Bain Jr. and some of those D tackles and rotational DN pieces and making the additions at linebacker tells me that maybe Miami is concerned, and maybe they are not playing at the level they want to play at. And this is kind of a red flag. There's also the possibility that they realize, oh crap, we have a really good QB, we've recruited and developed well in the O-line, we have an awesome run game, and we have a good DC, and we think we can make a run at a championship. So let's get some more depth and maybe even some weapons for the future. I can see that being a reality too. This is going to be a good football team. And by good, I mean good from traditional Miami expectations and standards. So this will be a great team. This will be a top 10 team this year in college football. Some predictions that I have for Miami. My mild prediction, the layup one, is that the Hurricanes improve on the defensive side of the ball after an awful 2024 effort. I'm high on Miami's defense for sure. I'm also high on Carson Beck. I think he'll be back to his 2023 self and is a top 10 quarterback in the nation. So that's a medium prediction, just because the injury and how his drop-off last year was unexpected. It's a little bit more bold. My hot prediction, going up on the Scoville scale here, the Hurricanes win 10 games again, and this time make it to the ACC championship game. I say 10 because given all this team loses and just the matchup that they have with Notre Dame and Florida, I think there is a chance they lose one of those games. They're probably losing an ACC conference game, but I think that they'll go 7-1 and reach the ACC championship game. And I'm picking 11-1. So they'll lose either one game in conference or one game out of conference here. My scorching prediction is that Cristobal makes his first appearance in the college football playoff. It's scorching because A, they're not favored to, B, they're from the ACC. So an ACC team at 11-2, if they really look weak, like let's say they win 8 or 7 one-score games, the playoff committee could leave them out over a 9-3 Florida that maybe beats them head-to-head, or a 9-3 Oklahoma. Could see that happen. And if they go 10-3 and don't win it, they're definitely out. Like they will have to. They cannot lose 3 games and reach the playoffs because they're not a part of the Big Ten and they're not a part of the SEC. Prediction number 5, the Hellfire one, is that Miami's defense ranks in the top 25 by the end of the season. Could be higher than that. I'm kind of thinking more top 20, but top 25 is already bold. So I just cut it off right when it got to my boldest prediction for Miami. Is like, yeah, top 25. I'm kind of thinking it'll transform and be really good. Now, I don't think Corey Heatherman's Jim Knowles, so it's not going to be like Ohio State where it comes in and the defense goes from bad to top 25, fringe top 25. This is more so because this team, I think, has the talent and then the schedule to match up with it and has enough proven players they got from the portal to where they're going to make a pretty big jump. Like Knowles, for example, he didn't bring over a lot of players because the portal then wasn't as active as it is now, and that just wasn't quite Ohio State's style. They've been more willing to dive into the portal, not totally, but recently, than they were in 2022 or even 2023. Miami, on the other hand, is completely different. I mean, Miami will take whoever they think they need or whoever they really, really want out of the portal. So I think you'll see some more immediate results. Will this defense consistently be top 10 or top 5 every year under Corey Heatherman, which if you're Miami is obviously what you want? I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't rank him ahead of Phil Parker, Jim Knowles, Glenn Schumann, DeAnton Lynn, for example. I wouldn't do that. I don't even know if he's better than Tom Allen, although I think he is. But time will tell. He's a young defensive coordinator, and that side of the ball is a lot of talent. So my prediction for Miami, 11-2, 7-1, ACC runner-ups, and a college football playoff participant. Probably won't get a first-round bye because I think Penn State and Clemson only lose a game or go undefeated, and then the SEC champion would get a bye, and the SEC runner-up, if they only have 2 losses, would get a bye over Miami. So Miami likely gets a home playoff game. You probably win that, especially if you're, the 5 or 6 seed and probably get pitted against the G5 or Big 12 representative. But it'll be a first-time college football playoff appearance for Miami in 2025. We're going to witness that, and it's coming. I mean, the way they're recruiting, developing, how they've improved year over year over year is, I think, only a sign of the times to come. All right. Now let's move on to Oregon. And kind of a opinion of mine that I wouldn't classify as bold because it's not, this is more of a hypothetical than anything else. And also, Nick Waldman, I got your email. So thank you for sending that. Okay. So let's get on to this and talk about why Oregon might be the best Big Ten program. I say might be the best because I don't think they're the best right now. I don't think so, but they could be the best right now. And maybe we're just focusing a little bit too much on that Rose Bowl and not enough on the overall upward trend that the Oregon program has shown us from 2022 to 2023 and then from 2023 to 2024. Oregon might be the best Big Ten program. Now, let me know what your reaction is to that in the comment section below. I'm not saying I believe that. I'm saying there's an argument for that to be the case if you want to be bold and if you want to include a future projection using trends into determining who you think the best programs in America are. Oregon is 35-6 with Dan Lanning. 2023 Pac-12 runner-ups to a Washington team who I think had one of the highest ceilings in the nation and several first-round NFL draft picks and a top 5 coach in Kalen DeBoer. And in 2024, they were the Big Ten champions, and they beat a Penn State team that had some aliens. They beat an Ohio State team that had some aliens. They then lost to said Ohio State team with aliens. But something I said for the entire season I was preaching this, especially in November and in the Big Ten championship game. And I should have stuck to it more closely, but I never entirely really got off of it, is that Oregon never had a true alien last year. I mean, no one on their roster was playing at the level of Abdul Carter or Tyler Warren, and no one at the level of Jeremiah Smith or Caleb Downs. They just didn't have alien players last year. They had some good players, some great players, some players like Mateo Uyunglele, for example, who maybe this season can be an alien player. And maybe at times their tackles were close to that, like Josh Connerly Jr. and maybe a Johnny Cornelius too. But I could see it in watching their team that they were punching above their weight class in different circumstances, or they were overcoming adversity that wasn't self-inflicted. It was just a part of the process of leveling up the talent at the same time of having to win in that moment and not being able to wait very long to level up the talent, which is what happens at good programs, especially now that you can use the transfer portal. When I look at Oregon, I see a team that this season has an incredible opportunity. They could be the best Big Ten program this season, or even right now, and they can show it by going 11-1, 12-0 with this schedule, by coming close to reloading, by beating everyone who they should beat, which is everyone but Penn State, and then heck, maybe you beat Penn State too. At that point, I mean, do we think that Penn State is going to beat Ohio State? I do, but could be wrong. I mean, Penn State hasn't beaten Ohio State since 2016. Do we think Ohio State's going 12-0? I mean, do we think they're going to beat Michigan or Penn State or Texas? I do not think they're beating all of them. I don't even think they're beating 2 out of 3. I think 1 out of 3 or 0 out of 3 is more likely than 3 of 3, for sure. As for Oregon, they've leveled up their talent by a ton. And from a Big Ten perspective, I rank it as the 9th toughest Big Ten conference schedule, just looking only at conference games. When I observe at Penn State, Indiana, and USC, those are the 3 toughest games, they should go 2 of 3 or 3 of 3 in those matchups. If they do, and they go 12-0 again, and they're in Indy, and Penn State or Ohio State aren't, and the other one is an inferior record, and then Oregon goes on to win the Big Ten second year in a row, why wouldn't they be the best Big Ten program? Unless they have a repeat of last season and Ohio State or Penn State win it all again in dominant fashion and destroy Oregon in that fashion. This team can go 12-0. I think it's realistic because the schedule only includes really one team that I think will be definitively better than Oregon. But I also think 8-4 is realistic. There's a wide range of outcomes here. And if Oregon is the best Big Ten program now, and we just don't know it yet, or they're going to become that, they have to go 11-1 or 12-0. And that's going to be a challenge with only bringing back 43% of their production, being ranked 7th in preseason SP+, when Penn State's higher, and Indiana and a team like USC can probably play themselves in that top 10 conversation by the time the Ducks play them. But I love this roster. I love this team. Some Oregon players who I think are of All-American caliber, I would say, are Mekhi Hughes at running back. I would also say that center Iapani Lololu is of that caliber. Emmanuel Pregnon is. Isaiah World at tackle is. I think Brycen Moore is going to have a fantastic breakout season and be that caliber of player. Kenny and Sadiq at tight end will be. Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti could be All-Americans. Bryce Betcher could be. I think Theron Johnson and maybe Dylan Thieneman could be. And then they have a lot of younger guys, not just more, like Trey McNutt, Neem Offord, Ife Obadegwegu. I probably butchered his last name because I don't exactly remember it, but first name is Ife. He's going to be a starting cornerback for the Ducks this year. I apologize if I misremembered that last name. They have a lot of like redshirt freshmen. Don't forget about like Elijah Rushing or Aiden Breland, redshirt freshmen, who could very well step up and immediately be high-level players due to the staff they have, the assistant staff, and then their talent level. The way Oregon's recruiting is scary. The way they've developed, the way they've schemed, the way they've game prepped. I've heard people talk about, well, Dan Lanning can't win the big game. Well, they beat Ohio State last year, and then they beat Penn State. And they beat Ohio State while, in hindsight, having a roster that was far inferior to them in terms of talent. And they beat a Penn State roster that was inferior to the Ducks in talent. They did. But in terms of development, in terms of alien players, I actually think Penn State had the better roster. And FPI will tell you, Penn State at the end of the year was a better team or similar caliber team to Oregon. And yet, Oregon was ahead of them, a step or 2 or 3 ahead of them the entire game. Oregon fans got mad at me for saying that Oregon's team last year wasn't as talented as Lanning wanted, or that in a different universe they were a 9-3 team. That's actually not an insult at all. I mean, everyone watched the Rose Bowl. And the fact that if that game were played the following day, Ohio State would once again win in dominant fashion. Same as the following day and the day after that. It's a compliment. It means that with worse players and worse assistant coaches, that your head coach in Dan Lanning was able to beat Ryan Day, was able to make Jim Knowles' defense look like it didn't know what it was doing. They were able to limit Abdul Carter and contain him well enough, and force Drew Aller to throw at a 50% completion percentage with corners who aren't going to start in the NFL from last year's team. That's a compliment to your staff. That means as those players age out of the program and your younger, bigger, more athletic physical players get to be developed by the staff and coached by Lanning, that you're going to be in a wonderful position. That was never an insult. I don't understand why people took it that way. Before we exit out of this segment, I want to give you some reasons as to why it could be number one in the Big Ten. More detailed reasons. Not what they have to do, not maybe why they could showcase that this season or why last season in general showcase that. Just specific 10 reasons why. So Lanning has improved as a coach. In 2022, they got aced by Georgia. Don't blame him for that. It was his first game against his old boss. They choked to Washington, choked to Oregon State, tried to choke to Mac Brown in the Holiday Bowl. Good team, not a fantastic resume, but it's year one. You got to give grace to year one, always. Year two, gets out-coached by Kalen DeBoer 2 times. And the road trip to Texas Tech wasn't pretty, but they won that game. They humiliated Oregon State. They humiliated Liberty. Pretty easy schedule for sure, but the way they aced Utah and casually beat USC, and also just the way they played Washington competitively, they played Washington more competitively than Texas did. That showed progress. They were, in my mind, the 2023 team, if you put them in last year's field, it would have probably been them and Ohio State for the Natty, and that game would be closer than some would expect. They were more talented in 2023 at a variety of key positions, especially the O-line, running back, quarterback, receiver. They were more talented everywhere on offense, and I think that their defense was similar. A bit better in some areas, worse overall in the D-line, but maybe a little bit. They were probably better at DB, if my memory serves me correctly. So in 2024, Lanning goes 2-1 in big games. Beats Penn State, beats Ohio State, beats Michigan on the road. Not a big game, but still winning against Michigan on the road and Wisconsin on the road with that travel was good. That was good. I think that showed progress. In last year as well, he improved. Well, again, the starting roster got worse. 23 Oregon, the metrics will tell you, the film will tell you. 23 Oregon was better than 24 Oregon by a decent chunk. And yet, Lanning found a way to win more big games against a 2024 Ohio State team, for example, and even a 2024 Penn State team that were more talented by recruiting rankings than Washington, and that for Penn State he had to travel out to see, and that for Ohio State won the national title while Washington didn't. Reason number 3, and that Ohio State team was obviously power rated higher than that Washington team, and had a better staff. Number 3, Oregon is on track to be number 1 in recruiting. Look at last year's class, where they have the highest average rank per recruit. It's a crazy recruiting class. I'm gonna talk about that specifically. I mean, just pulling it up here right now, they had 1, 2 5-stars, and then 3, 4, 5 top 100 players. You look at their composite rank, which was 5th. They had 19 high school commits, average player rank of a 94.35. They were inches away from passing Alabama and Ohio State, who had anywhere from 2 to 7 more commits than them, because that's how quality their class was. You then adjust their portal ranking. They had the 3rd overall class, high school and portal, with an average player rank of a 93.44. For the rest of the Big Ten, Ohio State's was a 91.51, Michigan's was an 89.93, USC's was an 89.09, Penn State 89.69, Nebraska lower than an 89, so average player rank of like a high 3-star. Oregon, by high school recruiting right now, you look at their 2026 class, Ohio State's ahead of them in terms of volume, average player rank of a 92.46 with 20 commits. Michigan also has 20 commits with an average rank of a 90.96. USC with the number 1 class is 31 commits with an average player rank of a 92.14. Oregon's only 14 commits, but an average player rank of a 93.96. And 12 of their 14 players are blue chippers, and the majority of those players are like inside the top 200. Jet Washington, Emmanuel Iheanacho, Jalen Lott, Keandre Harrison, Tredarian Ball, Tommy Toffee. Those are all top 100 players. 6 of them. Almost half of their recruiting class is top 70 players. It's crazy. And then they're in the running for more. Like Devon Benjamin. Or I also see that they're warm on Anthony Jones out of Alabama. And I imagine that they're a team that could flip some guys for sure. And they've done a really good job at roster retention and keeping their more talented guys at home. If they continue their recruiting that they've been doing in the portal and high school and the Big Ten, they will be the most talented Big Ten roster here in a year or two. Number 4, they're climbing quickly. Ohio State doesn't have much room to climb, to be fair. They've been the number 2 or number 1 Big Ten program ever since really Jim Tressel's first natty. They have. But Oregon's moving fast. And I mean fast. Did anyone think they'd go 13-0 last year? I didn't. Many didn't. Now, to be fair, I also didn't predict them to lose to Ohio State in the fashion they did in the Rose Bowl. But they're catching up to the top of the Big Ten very quickly. And if they continue with their current pace, like I said, recruiting, the fact they showed they were capable of winning big games last year against Penn State and Ohio State, they're coming. Number 5, they have the deepest pockets in college football. Do they? They're top 5 at the worst. I think number 1 at the best. The list could probably be written on my hand of the programs that can outspend Oregon. Like Texas Tech, Michigan if Larry Ellison's involved, Texas with that oil money, maybe USC if all their donors are aligned at a table with their coach, GM, and AD. Not many can outspend Phil Knight, not even in the Big Ten, which has the wealthiest donor bases. Number 6 and 7 is that they have Big Ten offensive line play and defensive line play. And of course, I'm going to compare this with Penn State and Ohio State, who are the other top programs in the Big Ten right now. Michigan and USC, of course, have the opportunity, including maybe Nebraska, to get there, but I'm going to have to wait and see. Their 50% blue chip ratio in the O-line is higher than Ohio State's by 10 percentage points. Their 80% BCR in the D-line is 5 percentage points higher than Ohio State's. Now, Penn State has a 70% BCR in the O-line. I mean, Penn State's O-line recruiting is like Alabama under Saban levels good. Just is. Didn't know if you knew that, but Penn State aces everyone in the Big Ten at O-line recruiting. They ace everyone outside of maybe Michigan last cycle or maybe Ohio State this cycle, who at that point is now just trying to re-catch up to Penn State's O-line recruiting. Never thought I'd be saying this like 2 or 3 years ago, and yet here we are. Trotwine, I think, is the best O-line coach in the nation outside of maybe Kyle Flood and Joe Rudolph. Like, those are the 3 right there for O-line coaches. The fact that Oregon is more talented high school-wise in the trenches than Ohio State is encouraging if you're a Duck fan. And overall, it's the same with Penn State. Penn State's O-line's more talented, but Oregon has a wider margin over Penn State's D-line in terms of talent than Penn State does over them on the O-line. Now, Penn State and Ohio State, traditionally, and especially recently, in terms of Penn State and Ohio State too, have developed better on D-line than Oregon has. But Oregon's catching up quickly there. Remember, they don't have the same staff continuity as Ohio State and Penn State in terms of overall, like, past 5 years or past decade. Day's been there for over half a decade. Franklin has been there for over a decade. Lanning's only entering year 4. And he didn't inherit the same situation Day did. And Penn State was a better team entering 2022 than Oregon was. Like, they were. So, got to give a little bit of grace and understanding there. But their D-line and O-lines are already as talented as the SEC and Big Ten D-lines, the best of the best. 8th is staff continuity. They brought back almost all of their staffers, and they did a good job replacing their wide receivers coach. They did. I really love this staff. It's one of the best staffs in America. And they're not just a staff that is good at game planning and developing. They do a good job just straight up evaling players out of the portal, out of high school. When was the last Oregon player you remember coming out of the portal or out of high school, or more so portal? They've done a much better job with portal evals, but that's because they're trying to level up talent and gain experience for the high school guys. So I think it's fair to say that you can't quite judge their high school evals yet. Although I think Moore is perfect, and there's a chance that some diamonds in the rough can for sure emerge, or young players can step up in big ways this year, and I think that'll happen. But when was the last Oregon transfer that you think busted or didn't do his job for the majority of the season? I can't name them. They do a really good job evaluating talent. And number 10 is their underrated development. I mean, look at what they did with Derek Harmon. Derek Harmon was awesome at Michigan State, but he turned into a true NFL first-round tackle at Oregon, cut some weight, was more disciplined, was just an overall much better player. Look at Mateo Uiagalelei. Not everyone develops 5-stars into being awesome, and yet Oregon's D-line has gotten better and better every year. Look at their offensive line. Look at that. Brought in portal players. They've gelled well. Josh Connerly Jr. was well developed. Of course, I'm not sitting here telling you they're the best developmental program. I mean, I think that it's much easier to develop 5 stars than it is 3 stars or 4 stars. Just is. Like, let's be fair and let's be honest. But Bo Nix was a 5-star. He wasn't doing so hot at Auburn. Comes to Oregon and is developed into a first-round pick. Stuff happens. Again, I think it's understandable if you have some concerns about Oregon's development and whether it's just elite or just good, but I would trend to say that it's going to be revealed to be elite rather soon. Just is. Like Ohio State's is, overall. Penn State's, I would say even more so, given that they recruit at a much lower level than Ohio State, and now even Oregon. I would actually boldly say that Penn State right now is probably the best developmental program in the Big Ten. It used to be Michigan from 2021 to 2023. I think Penn State kind of took that over last year. And Ohio State is just, it depends on your view of it. If you think that developing a 5-star is still as impressive as developing a 3-star, 4-star, and I understand that view, then Ohio State's still number 1. If you want to give more credit to development for 3 stars and 4 stars, I'd say you got to side with Penn State or Michigan over Ohio State recently. But Ohio State's top 5, top 10 there still, and they recruit top 5. So top 10 development or top 5 development plus top 5 recruiting means you're going to have a top 5 team every year. It's an elite operation. And that's who Oregon has to compare themselves with. A team that develops at a high level and recruits at a high level. In the Big Ten, Ohio State's the epitome of that. And they beat you. So you have to live up to that. And I think Oregon right now is in a position closer than anyone else to get to a point where they could be the number 1 program, and that across a consistent stretch of time, while being in the same conference as an Ohio State, and also with Penn State, Michigan, and USC trying to compete with that. Hope you like this video and understand that, again, this is a hypothetical conversation and me trying to be forward-thinking and open-minded. I'm not saying they're the number 1 program in the Big Ten right now. I'd say that's Ohio State. But there is a chance that they are the number 1 program, and we don't know it. And the reason that Rose Bowl game happened is because Ohio State's already where they want to be at in terms of talent, and Oregon just isn't there yet. I'm very curious, for example, to see what Ohio State versus Oregon in 2026 looks like, because by then, Oregon will probably be where they want to be in terms of talent. Ohio State still will be there, and I'm excited to see that game. And heck, maybe they'll play in the playoffs this year. Maybe that'll be the Big Ten championship game matchup. Will be Oregon versus Ohio State. All I'm saying is that Oregon is an awesome Big Ten program, and that you should pay attention to them. That Rose Bowl game does not define them. It does in part, but it's not the whole, oh yeah, they're fake, never win a natty. That's a little bit of cope. That's a little bit of cope. I mean, if you're Penn State, you got beat by a team who was in their first year of the Big Ten in a conference that, given the players you had, you should have won the Big Ten last year. If you're Ohio State, it was understandable to go and lose to them in Autzen. It's a hard place to play. Neutral field, you would have beaten them, even in October when you still had some things to resolve. But the fact they're out recruiting you, especially in the trenches where you've historically developed better, it's really? Really? Come on. You got to take Oregon seriously. People who don't take Oregon seriously either don't know what they're talking about or they're coping. It's the same thing with people who thought that Ohio State last year was incapable of winning it all, or that Michigan was incapable of winning it all the year prior, or that Georgia would never break through under Kirby Smart. Just come on, guys. Be better than that. And last but not least, we will talk about Texas and a few reasons why I think Texas football is here to stay. Actually, this isn't last but not least. I am getting pretty close to my time limit, though, so I may have to get off. But before that, I want to get to some super chats. Thank you, Chris Lane, for the $2 super chat. This is just because. I really appreciate it, Chris Lane. Blue Wolverine, thank you for the 9.99, so $10 super chat. I really appreciate that. He says, like the video, share the live, and subscribe. Thank you, Blue Wolverine. I very much appreciate that. Very much. Thank you for tuning in, and go blue to you. And for Chris Lane, I gotta say it, super fan, moderator, go Buckeyes. Gotta say it. David, thank you for the $10 super chat. May have missed it, but have you done a video live stream where you made predictions on Minnesota? No, David, but the good news for you is that's coming. Either tomorrow, where I'm going to try my best to go live, and I think I can, or Sunday, or Monday. Sometime in the next week, there will be a live segment about my Minnesota prediction. Like, that's coming. I did Iowa, did Wisconsin, did Illinois. Logically, Minnesota and I would say Rutgers are next up on the list. Okay, so yeah, thank you for the super chats, guys. I appreciate it. David and Blue Wolverine, thank you for the $10 super chat. And also, Chris, thank you for the $2 super chat. I really appreciate you guys for supporting the channel. It means a whole lot to me. We may not have time to get to my USC one, but let me just text my friend. Okay. There. I'm going to blitz through this because I think this is a video that deserves to be 8 minutes long or 7. It's just going to be quick with brevity, and I think that'll make it more powerful. I think that talking about Texas and giving 10 reasons why they're back, but all with brevity, all with a punchline, is the most powerful. Because I think Texas fans understand that they're not just back, but they're here to stay. And I think that any reasonable college football fan understands that. I'm going to give you 10 reasons why Texas football is here to stay. They're not just back, and I think they're back right now. But I like what Chip Patterson had to say on the Cover 3 podcast, that Texas just isn't back. Texas is here. They're 38-17 under Steve Sarkisian since he arrived, and 7 of those losses came in year 1, where they had to do a total program reset, hit the dynamite, blow everything up, ignite the dynamite, or ignite the C4, whatever analogy you want to use. They had to blow everything up, including the foundation, and build it back. They have back-to-back college football playoff semifinal appearances, and they put 11 and then 12 players in the 2024 and 2025 NFL draft, including 5 first-rounders. We'll talk about that a little bit more here, but let's get to the 10 reasons. Reason number 1 is program humility. Program humility. Now, what do I mean by program humility? What do I mean by Texas being humble? Don't they flash the Lamborghinis? Don't they pay kids a bunch of money to go there? What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by this is that Steve Sarkisian has a history of not being as good of a coach as he was now. He has a history of the whole incident where he got fired due to essentially alcohol abuse at USC, showing up to practice incredibly inebriated. He's open about that. And I think he's also open to criticism. And he seems like a guy who, unlike some coaches who bark at fans or who stubbornly say, well, I had to do this even though it lost us the game, looking at some Big Ten coaches even, and I think the Big Ten is the best coaching in the land, but they also have some stubborn guys. My feeling of Steve Sarkisian is that he's someone who can say, yeah, I messed this up. And he can say that publicly. And he's also open about the fact that he used to make mistakes and he wasn't the same person that he is now. That self-reflection, to be able to do that publicly, that breeds wins. Because if you can self-reflect like that in public, imagine the thought processes and evaluations that you're doing in private with your staff, with your players, with the direction of your program. Sarkisian has prior coaching experience, which I think is what makes him the best roster constructor in football and one of the best CEOs. Game management's a little bit of a different conversation, but they've improved there under him too. I think that he has made the program, well, they definitely have a kick in their step. I think they have some humility there too that plays to their advantage. Number 2 is their elite development. We've talked about this already. 23 players taken in the NFL draft since the 2024 draft, with 5 taken in round 1. That's more than Ohio State. That is, I believe, let me check this, looking at 2024. Doing a little bit of live research here, I know I'm guilty of, but I know it's more than Ohio State because Ohio State brought everyone back. It is more than USC. It's more than Notre Dame. It's more than Michigan. It's just straight up, it's more than Michigan. And I think, if I'm wrong, it's either tied Georgia or one guy ahead of them. And I also believe, yes, it's more than Alabama. More than Penn State. It's just, look at that. It's more than Clemson. Who has put more people in the NFL draft over the last 2 drafts? You can probably only name Georgia. Only. That's crazy. That is elite development right there. And they use the portal at times, yes, but Ewers was from the portal, and Ewers was a bust in the sense of going from a 5-star recruit, number 1 overall, to only being picked in the 7th, 6th round. Was a bust in terms of potential. A lot of their high school bread and butter players have been developed at a phenomenal level, among the best in America. Number 3 is elite recruiting. Sark has always signed top 10 classes there. More often than not top 5. Last year he recruited the number 1 class of 2025. And in 2026, they have one of the better quality classes overall. And they have the number 1 kicker, number 1 punter, number 1 long snapper. They have an elite D-line class. Unlike a lot of the other D-line classes, they got Tyler Atkinson in recruiting, who we'll talk about in a different segment, a later segment on recruiting. I cannot stress to you how Texas, from my perspective, is that program who is the closest to the 2010s programs, where they are just stacking talent and stacking talent and stacking talent. That has to do with their physicality, their elite strength and conditioning. Their players are athletic, they're fast, they're tough. And the roster has improved every season Sark has been there. Every single season. Every season. Also, it's reason number 10, but I'll just skip around because why not? It's fun. The deepest pockets in the sport. I mean, I think only Oregon, USC, maybe Michigan, in terms of just raw elite Texas Tech too, in terms of having top end donors who can just drop a bag and get anyone they want. No one's safe from those specific donors at those schools. Ellison at Michigan. I forget the Texas Tech guy, but billionaire former offensive lineman. Texas with their oil money. Phil Knight for Oregon. USC, I think, kind of has a collective of donors, although maybe I'm wrong. Kind of a hive mind there that is in alignment with the staff and different things. It's impressive that they've signed that class. But Texas, what they've done with their roster, and the fact that, for those of you who say they aren't back, look, they won the Big 12 in 2023. They nearly won the SEC in 2024. They are the only program who's made the semifinals 2 years in a row. They're the only program on an active streak of more than 1 year of going to the semifinals. Penn State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State weren't there in 2023. Notre Dame wasn't even close. They weren't. They lost 3 games in the regular season. Penn State got made. They were made by Ohio State and Michigan in 2023. Had no offense in big games. And then we all know the story. We all know it. What happened with Ohio State in 2023? They probably deserved to be in. I thought they were a top 4 team that year, but they lost to Michigan with how it was set up and how the fact that you had so many other teams that won 11 games, they were never getting in. They were never, unless you didn't have divisions, and therefore they had another shot at Michigan the following week in the Big Ten championship game. And then Michigan missed. Washington missed because they both went from going 12-0 to 7-5 or worse. And then obviously Alabama didn't make it. Texas right now, in terms of reaching the semifinals, is the most consistent program, along with maybe like, Georgia, Ohio State are in that conversation, but Alabama isn't anymore. And then you go from that to, they went from choking games in 21 and 22. You'd build leads, then you'd blow said leads. In 23 and 24, they build leads, and then maybe they surrender some of it, but they don't really choke them away. They don't. I mean, they tried to choke it at times against Alabama in 23, still won by double digits. And against Washington, they didn't really choke that game. They were just never in the lead. They were playing catch-up. It was the same thing with Ohio State last year. They were competing. They could have easily won those games, but they were never in the lead in that specific game. And you play the game once. You don't play it 10 times, for example. They're just on the doorstep. And something else that's encouraging is the fact that defense wins championships. And Texas has figured out defense. Only Ohio State, with the nation's best defensive coordinator in Jim Knowles, fielded a superior defense to the Longhorns last year. And per ESPN's FPI, Texas actually had the best defense in America. It was better than Ohio State's and Notre Dame's, who were a whole tier below those in efficiency. I disagree with that, but I also understand the logic. I think Ohio State's defense had a higher ceiling, but they didn't have the same balanced roster, weaker at corner, while Texas was stronger there and closer to Ohio State overall in the roster standpoint on defense. And they also, Texas's defense, I know for a fact, because their corners were better and because of what they did to Ohio State's wide receivers, they didn't stop them, but they limited them better than anyone else's corners did. They wouldn't have given up 32 points to Oregon, even though it was on the road. They wouldn't have. So I disagree with it, but I also understand why ESPN's FPI viewed it that way. Number 9 is staff continuity. Sark is an elite staff and is entering year 5 with him as the head coach and the same OC, defensive coordinator, and special teams coach. And reason number 10 is they have top 5 pockets in the sport, which we already went over. Those are my 10 reasons why Texas football is here to stay. Whether you want to say they're back or here to stay, I prefer to change it and say this is why Texas football is here to stay. They are elite in so many ways. I think their only weaknesses right now is Sark has got to figure out in-game management and just move from great to elite there. But everything else, there's a good chance Texas is the number 1 program in football moving forward, given the reasons I provided. Okay, everyone. I would love to stay on longer and talk about that USC video. I'd love it, but I can't. I don't have the time. Ran out of time, of course, which I typically am on longer for each segment than I want to be because I get carried away and there's just a lot to talk about. I have to go on my evening bike ride, which I do 2 times a week just to keep me physically active. Got to do that. I will see you all tomorrow. It'll probably be a longer show tomorrow. It was an hour and 40 show tonight. Expect a show that's probably 2.5 hours tomorrow. Expect that. Not going to promise anymore, but there's a lot of content I want to get to. Some stuff that's going to be shorter than this, like some